Namaste. Welcome
Namaste,
all
Ramesh.
to welcome all to Candid Convos, a thought leadership initiative of Lead Fact Solutions. In the third edition today, we are privileged to have Sanjay Dugar with us. Sanjay is an electronics and communication engineer from Bangalore Institute of Technology, pursued his career in ITES companies, rose in his career with his sheer hard work and dedication, and went on to become president, director, managing director of various reputed companies. Currently, Sanjay is director, client engagement of C2C OD Private Limited, Bengaluru. Sanjay is a certified professional facilitator, master CPF M from International Association of Facilitators. He is a Rotarian and the most sought after management leadership OD consultant in India and abroad. He has written the best selling book, The Facilitative Leader. In today's edition, we are going to talk to him about the book, The Facilitative Leader. Thanks, Sanjay.
Thank you very much, Ramesh. It's a pleasure joining you on this recording that you're doing, and I'm sure a lot of viewers are looking forward to hearing from you and different other people on the candid conversations that they would have with you.
Thank you. Thanks, Sanjay. See, in the book, in the initial chapters, you written about three era of leadership. You spoke about personality era, you spoke about influence era, then you spoke about transformational era, and you have given your personal experience, as you pass through all this era of leadership. Can you please explain that to us?
Yeah, that's a smart question, Ramesh. So the era of leadership, actually, there are many more, but I've simplified it in the book.
Mm,
But if we have to go back in time, right, it all started with whoever had power was the leader.
mm,
And power could be in many forms, either
right,
physical form, emotional form, money form, and they would call the shots. Others would
right,
have to do what they tell them, and
right.
they would lead by force, right?
Mm,
Very dictatorial. And then it slowly morphed into a person who could speak and present very well, someone whose oratory skills would kind of swerve the audience in a
mm,
way that they would believe in that person and they would just blindly follow that person in wherever he or she takes them.
right.
There are lots of such examples as well. And then gradually, people started becoming a little more, I will use the term educated or learned
Mm,
or wise. And they saw that, okay, just because some people say something doesn't mean they will take them along to a safer zone. And
okay.
then they started looking at what's the vision of that person, the visionary leadership.
Mm,
That's how it morphed, right? And I clubbed all of that into what I call the personality era, either the power or the oratory skills or the vision. They kind of helped people follow without looking at the people dimension. They only looked at the leader dimension in that era.
mm,
Later, it morphed into what they call as somebody who could help them transform, help them change, help them grow. There was a little inward looking, what's in it for me type of thought. And that is how, from the personality era, it became an influential kind of a era where I could give you your benefit and get my work done.
right.
And that went for a long time. And what they also talked about changed both for the companies or for the individual or whatever work that they were doing. And that was in one form. And a bigger version of that became more rampant now, which we call complete transformation itself, because
Mm,
businesses are changing. The shape and size and look and feel of the business houses are changing. So people who now lead such businesses had to do more than just influence people. They would have to involve people. They would have to
mm,
engage and motivate and inspire people to walk on unknown territory.
Right.
That is what I call the transformational era, which even persists today and perhaps in a even more rapid changing environment. That's why I refer to it as the VUCA world. Right?
Yes. Correct.
That's
Yeah.
where we are. I hope that answers your question.
Yep, sure. More from one-sided to balanced to more of inclusive. That's how it is transformed.
Absolutely,
Okay,
absolutely.
okay, great. So, and today we talk about UCA world, and some people call the BANI, BANI, and
Funny.
CCL came out with Center for Creative Leadership came out with RUPT, rapid,
Yeah.
unpredictable, paradoxical, tangled. So, in a way, all these things mean like things are not very clear. No, it's not going to be easy. That's what it all refers to. So, in this today's world, and especially with the advent of Gen AI, post-pandemic Gen AI now, what do you think could be the effective leadership style?
Yeah, that's very interesting because another step to add to that confusion is the adoption of Gen AI. Right?
Exactly, correct.
It's like really changing things at such a rapid pace and very,
Mm,
very unpredictable. The leaders themselves often don't know where they are going because they
mm,
really don't know. They are
exactly.
hoping that they would get somewhere,
Mm,
and they are placing their bets in a certain direction. And
mm,
in this kind of a confusion, if you need people's support, the only way you can do it is inclusion. Right?
right.
And that is why use the term facilitative leader. Uh,
Mm,
a leader who can be facilitative, who can listen to people, share their viewpoint as equals, not as the leader, but share it as equals, and what we call participatory decision making,
mm,
so that, well, some bets are going to fail, but then we took the bet rather than I took the bet or you took the bet. It's we took this bet, and let's see what happens.
mm,
And similarly, course correction along the way is becoming a normal thing. Right? You take a bet, you're going in a certain direction,
mm,
something happens in the market or within, and then your direction needs to change. So even that course correction, if it is participatory, if it is inclusive,
mm,
if it is consensus based, and all these are nothing but facilitative practices. And that's why I use the term the facilitative leader. And I'm not surprised that I get lots of queries about saying, how did you think of this? What did you do about this? But yeah, it was based on some research, it was based on talking to both successful leaders and one very important group, which is successful leaders who later failed.
oh, is it? Okay, okay. That's
And they
interesting.
were very, very vulnerable and candid in sharing that their leadership style failed. It is not that they failed, but
Mm,
their
mm.
leadership style failed. That was the turning point for me to think about this book. And that's how it came into existence.
Great. That's very interesting. See, there are certain competencies which you also mentioned in your book for an effective leader, and how it compares to being an effective facilitator. Are you seeing any symmetry in both?
Actually, they are very similar, very, very similar. In
Mm,
fact, a facilitator is also a leader who perhaps doesn't have direct stakes in what they are doing. But
mm,
a passionate facilitator uh, is as much involved. The leader might have direct stakes, but a passionate facilitator would have indirect stakes in getting to the desired outcomes.
right.
So a lot of similarity, right? Leaders. So if you even look at how things transformed, right? Earlier it was about discipline, being on time, and that meant everything. I'm not saying those are bad; those are
Yeah.
good characteristics. But can you be flexible when needed?
Right.
Right. So, and those are the traits of a facilitator. Right. I have a plan. I need to get to the outcome in a limited amount of time. But when I find that there is some interesting information, something going a little deeper, and it's helpful for the group, can I be flexible? And
Mm,
can I adapt and adopt on the go?
mm,
These are traits which a leader is also needing to display in everything that they do. The other part where I see a lot of symmetry between facilitation and leadership is really about how you approach participatory conversations.
Right.
And it's not necessarily always only logical. There could be emotions behind it. How do you sense it? How do you allow it to surface? And lots of times there are sarcasms. There are people indirectly passing the blame. How do you see it, sense it, and in a very, let's say, smooth way, kind of handle it so that all participants are made comfortable, are made psychologically safe,
Mm.
right? So that, yes, there will be, when you do things, there are bound to be things that happen well, and there are bound to be things that don't happen so well.
Correct.
But then, how do you allow conversations to go on both sides, the positive and the negative, and still be at the same emotional state? And in fact, looking forward to how you can make the net outcome better.
Mm.
And those are the qualities a leader needs to also showcase, when they need to be flexible, when not, when they need to touch the emotional chord, when not, and how much, and how to handle sarcasm, how to handle feedback, how to handle diversity of thoughts, and then arrive at consensus. Like harvesting group wisdom is a term we use in facilitation quite a bit.
Yes.
And even for a leader, I think what better than harvesting group wisdom?
Mm.
And if you see how the generational shifts have happened, the new gen has all the information on their fingertips. By the
Yes.
time you say something, they are able to use Google or Chat GPT or whatever and get you much more information than what you know.
Exactly.
And the best way is to take that in, because you can move at that pace, you can move that much faster.
Mm. Right.
And then if you think about, let's say, the values of a facilitator, about being inclusive,
Yes.
uh, the corporates today have started talking about DEI, but facilitators have been using it for the last 30 years or more,
Yes. Yeah.
right? So how can a leader use that facilitative style of inclusion? I
Mm.
think those are something very, very useful for a leader.
Great. And now it has become all the more important to strike a very good balance between results and relationship. I think it's no more a luxury. It's more like a mandatory now.
Yeah, it's a norm.
No,
It's a,
it's a
it's,
harm. Yep.
it's a given.
Yes, correct. Great. Sanjay, I would also like to know have an interesting quote from your book. You said like overusing facilitation would slow down the result actions, and underusing facilitation would slow down the results. And you said both are not desirable. Very interesting, Sanjay. This can you please explain the background of this?
Absolutely. So, of course, underusing facilitation is straightforward. When you don't pull out all the wisdom from the group,
Hmm.
you're not going to be able to optimize the best way to get to results. So,
Yes.
that's a given, right? So, you need to get the wisdom from the group. And that is why, if you do not facilitate, you will never reach the optimum level of leadership in
Right.
order to get results.
Hmm.
On the other side, overuse of facilitation is, the world today is offering so much of change that if you are trying to wait to get all the pieces of information before making a decision,
Hmm.
you'll never make a decision,
Exactly.
which simply means that you cannot progress.
Right.
Right? So if you use facilitation to let even people know that we don't have the full picture, and that's okay.
Hmm.
But with the
Okay.
picture that we have, let's make decisions and move forward. Which is why I say don't overuse facilitation when you're leading, because people are definitely going to say, here are a few missing pieces. Let's wait till we get that. And
Hmm.
then by the time you get all the pieces of information, your competitors have moved not two or three, but 20 steps ahead. And you're going to
Exactly.
be really missing out the bus.
Okay. So the right balance is what you would suggest.
Yeah, use facilitation at the time that is needed to harvest all the group wisdom, whatever is available to the fullest, and in that make your decisions and move on. Because there you'll have to necessarily take those risks. Today, no leader can say that they can make risk free decisions.
Right.
and that's the era we are in. And the risks and rewards are equally large.
Exactly. Correct. And to some extent, risk was an integral part of leadership, right? Any
It is
successful leader would have taken some risk,
some risk.
some
I
business
believe
risk.
the proportion of risk has gone up.
It has gone up. Yep.
And on the other side, uh, people who took risks alone versus today's leaders taking the risk along with the team, the transparency that is required, the vulnerability that is required, the humility that is required. I think all these are different traits that a leader necessarily needs to bring to the table. And a good facilitator obviously would be thriving when he is in this mode. So a good facilitator does make a good leader.
Exactly. Great. What are all the various applications of facilitation in a typical leadership role? See, we all know like leadership role has gotten different phases. One cannot, define a leader. We used to say like, as you go up, there is no job description for you. You'll have to do whatever comes to you to ensure like business succeeds.
Yeah, in fact, I've addressed that question in the book also in an indirect way, maybe not directly saying this is the role of a leader.
Yeah.
See, all leaders, they have only four kinds of meetings.
Mm,
They hold meetings to generate ideas.
right.
They hold meetings to align people to a description, which I call define.
Okay.
There are another group of meetings that leaders have, which is to analyze something, and
Right.
finally they meet to make a decision. So ideate, define, analyze, and decide. These are the four possible outcomes that leaders need to get in meetings.
Yes.
And I had shared in the book a framework called IDAD, ideate, define, analyze, decide, which is a self explainable image which says that in a meeting, you know where you want to end. You want to
Right.
end the meeting maybe at a decision, or end the meeting at an analysis, or end the meeting at a ideation, or end the meeting at something that you want alignment on.
Right.
An equal shared understanding is the term leaders use.
Mm,
So if you're having meetings for these four, on the way you may have to go in different directions. For example, if you want to make a decision, you may want to start with, first of all, can everybody know what the problem is, meaning define the problem.
mm,
Then maybe you want to move to an analysis stage.
right.
From there, you might move to an ideate stage and then go to a decision stage. So that image of IDAD, you can move from any box to any box in any order that you like. And you know where you want to end.
Right.
Where you need to start is dependent on the group. For example, in the same example, if the group is very familiar with the problem, you don't need to define, you can straight go to analysis.
Right.
And maybe the analysis is so clear that no ideation is required, you can directly go to a decision.
Decision. Yep.
So depending on what's happening in the meeting, you can move from one area to the other. And facilitation tools are available for each of these four categories.
Mm,
Like ideate, for example, I think almost everybody talks about brainstorming, brain writing,
correct.
and facilitators have even more ideas in their bag, like future bag
Yeah.
or vision board, so many other tools of ideation. Define focus group discussions, paired conversations, 1 to 4 all. These are different techniques that we use to align on definition.
And
And
reverse brainstorming is what we say. Reverse
reverse
brainstorming.
brainstorming is another great idea for
Yep.
ideation as well.
Yep. Mm,
Then analysis tools, I think again very familiar, root cause analysis. You have Pareto analysis, SWOT analysis. You have force field analysis. You have so many different types of analysis tools, and you can choose depending on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to understand the root cause of a problem, then you can do a 5 why analysis
yeah.
or a fishbone analysis, and you can use those tools in a meeting to get to the outcome.
Right.
Similarly, decision-making tools, you have criteria-based grid. Of course, voting is a very common thing, but voting is usually a non-consensus style of closing a meeting with a decision. Whereas a criteria-based grid or an impact effort grid could be better tools which is really building consensus.
Right.
So in that, when you look at the role of a leader, it's very easy. You can use facilitation in pretty much all your meetings.
Exactly. Great. Great. So, and coming to facilitation, what are all the elements that need to be considered, for effective facilitation? You mentioned about the space framework in your book.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, the space was more like when you want to consider how to design a facilitation session, what are the different areas that you want to cover or what
Hmm.
might impact your design?
Right.
And that is where we kind of created, and this is a model from my company C2COD that we use very often, and we call it SPACE,
Yeah.
which is it's basically an acronym. Again, S stands for social contracting,
Right.
right? So how do we contract? So if you're looking at it from a leader's context, it could be how do you contract in the meeting before
Right.
at the start of the meeting.
Hmm.
If you're a facilitator, it's about how do you contract with your client.
Yep.
How sure are you of moving forward? How sure are you that the outcome of the session will be taken into consideration as planned? A lot
Yep.
of social contracting is required.
Hmm.
The P stands for process as appropriate. And process are those which we just defined in the IDAD framework, right? All these different processes. How do you use them appropriately? Which one to use for what purpose?
Hmm.
And then A is about agenda and outcome. So you always go into a meeting knowing what is the outcome that you want
Right.
and how will your agenda lead to the outcome. They need to be synchronized.
Hmm. Hmm.
Meaning, am I going to analyze first, then am I going to ideate, am I then going to decide? So there has to be a sequence, which is the agenda. But of course, your outcome is the last step that you have in your design.
Correct. Sanjay, this is very important because what I also see is people feel like once I have a pakka agenda, then the outcome is by default. It is not so actually.
It's
The
not so.
agenda may or may not lead to outcome, but still,
And you need to be agile because the
exactly.
agenda, I use the term agenda, but I like to usually call it plan.
Plan. Okay.
Right? Because when you have a plan and not necessarily you stick to the plan,
Hmm.
but you don't sacrifice the outcome. You're aiming to get to the outcome.
Right.
So that's the A part.
Yeah.
Then the next element is the C, which is consider the environment. So if you need, for example, lots of stationery and marker pens or dot voting stickers or a wall where you can stick stuff or a flip chart where you can write, you want to consider what is possible in the room you have, in the area that is available, what is not available, what are the limitations and constraints. Is
Hmm.
there place for people to move around? Do you need them to move around?
Right.
All these kind of things.
Hmm.
At the same time, the other thing is when you have something which requires deep thinking, like a reflective exercise, then you want to make sure that the environment around you is in that mood. Right? So
Yes.
it's very important to consider the environment. And sometimes I'm surprised that many leaders, I'm particularly referring to leaders, but it same applies to facilitators. But very often leaders also are not really, I mean, every meeting is in the same room, meeting room or board room or whatever. Really, I mean, if you have a different expectation for the people to work on, should you not change that?
Yep. Hmm.
How can a person think if you are going to have rock music playing versus a background soft instrumental playing? I mean, even that change can affect the way your mind operates. And if you're trying to get optimum out of your meetings, you need to consider the environment and set it up accordingly.
Right.
And finally, E is engaging the group. And this has two parts to it. One part being how you prepare for it because of the background that you are aware of. And then human beings are human beings, right? So their moods are never predictable. So
Yep.
how to allow a session to sense either through their words, through their characteristics, expressions, body language, How do you sense and how do you help set the right level of energy for them to be fully engaged? When do you want high energy? When do you want a reflective low energy? When do you want something to be loud, fast paced? When do you want something to be soft? So all these are different things you want to look at so that you can engage people. I think the space model that way comes in very handy in thinking about how you want to start your meeting, how do you want to get ready for your meeting. I think that's where the space model it just makes us think in that all those dimensions and see if we know all what we want and then design the meeting.
Fine, Sanjay. That what you were telling, even in facilitation also, we used to say like, look out for emergence. So
Yes,
divergence,
absolutely.
emergence, and then convergence.
Yes.
So it is also very important.
Yeah, when people are still wanting to diverge, and if
Mm,
you try to rush them into convergence,
mm,
naturally you're going to get a not so optimum output.
exactly.
A classic example in a brainstorming session, in our office recently we had. Is it okay that I add a little story behind what
Sure,
happened?
sure. Yeah, please go on.
So, we were in a situation where we were trying to look at how do we break through the stagnant level that we had reached. This was a
Okay,
couple of years back.
okay,
And so we wanted some novel ideas. So we ran a brainstorming session. All the people of the C2C family were involved, and we started the brainstorming. And everybody wrote, and they put their stuff on the wall. They clustered it like typical, like any facilitator would do. And then we looked at all the clusters, and I realized that there was nothing novel that was coming out. There were ideas which we talk about on an everyday basis.
more of run of the mill.
Yeah, run of the mill.
Yeah,
And that's when I required when I kind of looked at it and I realized that what we actually did was a brain dump. We didn't
right.
do a brainstorming.
Mm,
So then I said, okay, now with all these ideas out of the way, can we now come up with ideas that we haven't written so far?
right.
And that turned the switch. So it suddenly became coming up with something which is very creative, very different. And then a couple of those ideas that came from the meeting we adopted, and that's what took us and brought us even forward in our journey as we grew. But this is the idea: when a facilitator is alive to the situation,
Yeah,
or a leader is alive to the situation, and don't rest until you reach your desired outcome. If you want novel ideas, don't sacrifice the word novel. You will get ideas, but if you want novel ideas, then you make the session go to novel ideas. So
right.
those are things which, when you are engaging the group, you'll be aware of, and you sometimes may have to be pushing without that hard sell. Right? You're just inviting the group to say, okay, now with all these done, let's come up with some really good new ideas, and,
Right.
and then it opens up the people's minds. So there are different ways by which you run even a simple thing like brainstorming.
Yes, great, Sanjay. And one another good thing what I noticed is you also given a lot of methods and tools in your book. You have not stayed only with
Yes.
some concepts. You got into giving some methods and tools. Some of the lesser spoken about but powerful tools like force field analysis,
Yeah.
criteria grid, as I think you have mentioned it now, and similarly impact effort grid. So
Yeah.
how these tools can be used? Some of these lesser known but powerful tools.
Yeah.
Force field, yeah.
So force field, if you have to use that, there's a purpose why you would use force field analysis. The
Mm,
force field analysis method is best suited when a problem is very complex,
right.
right? And when you talk about the problem in that complexity, people don't want to talk about solutions.
Mm,
A simple example is like Bangalore traffic.
right.
Okay, nobody wants to talk about it. Oh, yeah, it is what it is. But if you use force field analysis there, it can be
Mm,
very useful in generating ideas.
right.
No, I believe that this a similar exercise was run by the traffic police department, and they did come up with some changes.
Okay.
But to give us an understanding of force field analysis, basically what you do is you're looking at defining what is the problem in measurable terms. For
Right.
example, instead of calling it Bangalore traffic, you say, can we have the average speed of transport moving from 10 kilometers per hour to 15 kilometers per hour?
Mm.
So it's a tangible problem which people
Yep.
can visualize. And then we say, okay, now you draw that like a line and you say, how do we push from 10 to 15? How do we move it up? And
Right.
what are the forces that are holding us back? And what are the forces that are pushing us forward?
Right.
So then you get things like in this, maybe, people may say bad roads. Bad roads, is it slowing it down? So it's a force that is holding us back.
Mm.
Carpooling, okay, that's a force that's pushing us forward. And then when you break it up, then for each of these forces, the ones that are holding us back, we say, how do we minimize their impact
Right.
or get them off altogether? And how do we maximize those that are helping us?
Right.
Then ideas come up.
Mm.
Okay, carpooling, we can popularize it, we can talk about it. Or if we're talking of bad roads, how can we make representations where the roads are fixed in a particular way? And then solutions come up. So there was something coming up where buses are on both sides, public transport buses.
Mm.
They are also a problem and they are also a solution.
Right.
And that was very interesting. So we say, how do we then educate the bus drivers so that they are more on the positive side rather than on the, driving rashly and all of that. So that can then be, so when you see an element which is on both sides, then we learn that we need to build in some education so that the problem can be moved into a favorable light. So force field analysis is a very easy to use tool and can really open up large scale size
Right.
issues, I call them. You
Okay.
break up an issue into smaller problem areas
Mm.
and then forces, and then you can solve for the forces. That's the use of force field analysis.
That's very interesting, Sanjay. And we talk about three dimensions of a facilitator: making, doing, and being.
Okay,
What
it
do you
is.
think will be very, sorry?
I think you're referring to the knowing, doing, being.
Yes, knowing, doing, and being. Yes.
Knowing, doing, being. Yeah,
Yes.
so it was Ravi and I, when we were in Junjunu, we had coined this phrase when, we were trying to help this NGO there, Gandhi Foundation, and
Right.
we were trying to see how IAF can support them.
Mm.
And we talked about how can we break up teaching facilitators. So then we talked about the knowing layer, the doing layer, and the being layer,
Mm.
and how we can help people there. And your question about which is probably the most important,
Yes.
personally, I would think it's the being.
Being. Okay.
The moment you are a facilitator, you will use tools that you know of. You
Yes.
will make do with that.
Mm. Mm.
Your behavior will show up because of your being. So your doing will be good all the time. So
Right.
it's very important to really just be a facilitator. But I'm not downplaying the knowing and the doing. Keep in touch, learn new methods, try new processes, because the same method, each of us can run it in our own style, linked to our own persona,
Mm. Mm.
right? So if you look at how different facilitators run say, the same session, the same kind of tool, but they run it in a very different way, and each of them are effective.
Yep. Yes.
So it's really about, you can't copy paste.
Mm.
You can learn, adapt, and use. So the knowing is also important, the doing is also important, but all of that emerges from the being. So I would rate being a facilitator as the most important element.
So if you have to develop a leader, like being a leader could be the good way to start.
The being followed by the doing and the knowing.
Knowing. Okay. Okay.
So there is another equivalent of that, which is the being, be, do, have.
Mm.
Right? So being, then you will do things what you're supposed to do. You will have the results that you expect.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
that's how it flows.
Okay. What are all the competencies, or how would one develop the competencies? We also know, like IAF have defined, 6 competencies, in
Yeah.
their charter. How one can develop Sanjay?
So, to me, personally, the best way to develop is using your own self awareness.
Hmm.
Every time you facilitate a workshop, can you
Right,
then go back, open the competencies, and say, what of these you lived up to? What are things which you can do better?
right.
Uh, just by being aware, 80% will anyway get better as you move forward.
Hmm.
So, self awareness with a lot of methodical reflection, that is what is important. Of course, there are other ways where if you have a co facilitator or if you have somebody else who understands facilitation competencies, they can provide you feedback.
Right,
Now, there is a bit of a challenge, right? The feedback loop is in facilitation, I would actually call it opinion.
right,
It is the opinion of the other person that you could do this better.
right.
But will your style make that change, or will your what was the situation in which you did something? That is what counts.
Right.
Maybe an example might clarify that for you. Let's say you're facilitating a session and
Hmm.
you have a lot of people in the room, and people have been very quiet, and then you've asked a very deep reflective question, and finally after some time one person answers it,
Hmm.
and you respond saying good, and again there is silence, and then a lot of other people start responding. Now if you look at that good, right, it can come across as bias,
Hmm.
or it can come across as promoting engaging the group.
Right.
So in what context have you used it? That matters. So
Hmm.
for an observer who is not actively interacting with the participant, they can provide you an opinion,
Right.
but it's up to you to distill whether it makes sense for you to do make a change or continue the way you were doing.
Right. Okay. Interesting. And also, additionally, the programs conducted by, like for example, C2C also conduct a lot of programs to enhance
Yeah.
the competencies. So attending that and practicing will enable us.
Yeah. So when you say developing the skill,
Hmm.
what you can get when you attend such programs is the knowledge part.
Okay.
But the
Hmm.
skill part is a different game, right? Like I can teach you swimming in the classroom.
Right.
But if you really want to swim, the skill of swimming, you have to get into the water.
Exactly. Correct.
You may not be very good in your first attempt, but
Hmm.
you have
Hmm.
to keep going again and again and reflecting, what do I do to get speed? What do I do to get power and all of that? And then start developing those things.
Hmm. Okay.
So even if you attend, let's say, even IF sessions or C2C sessions on which can give you the knowledge of the competencies,
Hmm.
yes, but the practice you have to do.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's how it works.
And these triggers are also very important, like attending sessions and
Yes.
programs. That triggers, as you rightly said, knowledge. So then I feel like, okay, fine, now I know something about competency. How can I embellish it or how can I enhance it? So start
Exactly.
practicing it. So in that way, the triggers are also very important.
Yeah. So that's the knowing part.
Knowing part. Okay.
Knowing, but then you have to do.
Do.
And
Okay.
when you do repeatedly, it becomes a part of you, right? So then you be a facilitator that way.
Right. Okay. Great.
So that's how it works. So they are all interconnected, but the moment when you use the word skill,
Hmm.
for me, that is about you doing things yourself. If it is the knowledge part, then it is reading about the competencies, reading different people's versions about the competencies, their
Okay.
interpretations, having dialogues. Nowadays, in the IF hubs, we have those conversations, coffee conversations,
Hmm.
where a competency is discussed. And it is surprising how beautiful so many people come up with so many different dimensions on the same competency.
Hmm.
So it's quite amazing. It's a great learning every time.
Great. And Sanjay, finally, your own journey with IAF. You are now a CPF master, And as such, you are a very successful businessman. Right from your career, you have been very success in whatever you have been doing. So, how this credentializations or competence building in IAF could further enhance your own leadership style, Sanjay? Some interesting perspective could you share?
Yeah, I'm sure different people have different interpretation of credentials that they have. For me, my journey when I got into the CPF cycle, right? When I got my CPF, and then when I read the feedback of my CPF assessment, I was stunned. I came to know that I don't know a lot of things.
My God. Okay.
So that was the beginning of that journey. So, and then as I went in, okay, CPF Master happened along the way recently. Uh, but it was really looking at all that feedback that I got, working on it, challenging myself to break some of my thoughts and beliefs, limiting beliefs that I had. I had to break those. That was my journey. But all of that came from a very deep foundation, which was the passion to facilitate. Before I got into facilitation, I was doing corporate training also for 2, 3 years.
Right.
And I didn't know I was actually facilitating facilitative
Right.
training. But the information when I got about the impact facilitation can create, that was really, it made me completely buy into facilitation. And from there, that passion to facilitate and learn more about facilitation, I think that rubbed off. And from then, it has never been a turning back. Everywhere when I go, if I get an opportunity to facilitate, I'm facilitating. If I get an opportunity to see another facilitator performing, I love to see how they do it differently and what can I learn from them. Not just methods, but even
Yeah.
how they stand, how they talk, what kind of questions they ask, what's the expression on their face. All of this really shines.
Okay. It's more like talking facilitation, eating facilitation, and
Absolutely.
see,
Wherever there's an opportunity.
I remember, the example which Sachin Tendulkar gave when someone asked him like how you could become very successful. He said 6 hours of practice. That he said everyone does it. So then he said another 6 hours I watch others play. Oh, then 12 hours. Then he said another 6 hours I listen and talk about cricket. So in all, it becomes 16 to 18 hours of cricket. So
Yeah.
that's make someone
But
like
that's how it is.
yeah.
Even now, as I mentor many people who are aspiring to learn about facilitation,
Mm,
it is amazing because those conversations teach me more than I teach them. So
okay.
it is so useful, and it's actually such a humbling experience. You yourself are an EF, and I'm sure as you went through that journey, you would have realized, oh yeah, I understand this, but there's still like a huge chunk which I don't know anything about,
Exactly, Sanjay.
and
Yeah.
that's how it is. And then
Yes.
you start, going after it, trying to know more and more, and you start, and you realize that there's even more to learn actually. So
Exactly.
it's almost like a never-ending cycle of learning, but I'm loving it.
As you rightly said, even I wanted to pitch in that the feedback that I got during my EF journey is something amazing. So I was just wondering, from that case study, whatever I submitted, how someone could make out that gaps in stakeholder management. There was a gap actually, like how I contracted with the client. So that came out very nicely and very nicely put it there. That was an amazing revelation to me. Oh my God, I missed this thing.
I mean, IAF, hats off to them because one is, of course, publishing the competencies, but
Hmm.
how beautifully they invest on the assessors, the assessment, the practices, and
Hmm.
the process of giving feedback, and in such minute level of detail.
Exactly.
I think it's a blessing that we are connected with them.
Definitely, Sanjay. And the mentoring program, that's something amazing. that
That is
6 month of mentoring, which I had the good fortune of doing it with Larry Philbrook.
oh
That was
wow.
amazing. Yeah. So those 6 months were a good immersion I got with competency. It
In
doesn't
fact,
mean that,
Larry is a CPF emeritus.
yes, exactly.
He's like
So,
a fantastic facilitator, and great. You got an opportunity to be mentored by him is like wonderful.
yes. So then, the EF, again, the next step of becoming EF, that has further enhanced that immersion. Not that, I become expert, but at least now the familiarity is much more to the
Yeah.
competency.
Also, volunteering in the IAF in whichever way,
Hmm.
that also helps a lot.
Definitely. Yep.
If you want to develop your competencies of a facilitator, just volunteering, you'll be surprised. Unknowingly, you learn so many nice things.
Yep.
So that's another powerful way.
Right, Sanjay. Thanks.
Right?
Thanks a lot for your time.